Seven PBs, which is a continuation of the topic that we've been speaking up to until now, which are the three shitos that we had in regards to how we view the interaction between the Isser of having chametz on Pesach and the mitzvah of getting rid of the chametz. So to review, we had three opinions. One opinion was the shita of the Ri, that as long as you eventually get rid of the chametz, so then you are not over the Isser. That opinion is what we discussed last week. Shagged brought three proofs against it and discarded that opinion from halacha. That was one opinion. So we're left with two opinions. The opinion of the Rambam, which basically seems to understand that the two are not really related at all. There's an Isser Bali Rabbi Motzei, and the person can get malchus for that Isser, and he can't fix it up by getting rid of the chametz afterwards. We discussed that he doesn't necessarily always get malchus. There could be other factors like lav shein bo ma'isa, if he didn't do any action to be over the Isser, which would be the standard situation, so he wouldn't get malchus. But if he did do an action to be over the Isser, then he would get malchus. It's not a lav hanitik b'aseh. And we saw the shita of Rashi, which is that it is a lav hanitik b'aseh, and as the Shagged pointed out in the last year, Rashi seems to be a standard understanding of what that means, which is he's not going to get malchus if he fixes up his Isser of having the chametz, but it doesn't take away the fact that he did an Isser. Those are the three opinions. And so tonight we're basically going to be discussing, is Bali Rabbi Motzei a lav hanitik b'aseh? In which case it would have to be like Rashi, because he already explained in the previous year he doesn't hold of the sheet of the Ri, or is it not a lav hanitik b'aseh like the sheet of the Rambam? Okay, so the first thing that we need to discuss is it's really dependent a lot on the Girsos in a Gemara that we actually saw once before, maybe a couple of shiurim ago. In the first Maramakom, it's the Gemara in Pesachim Daf Tzadi Hey and Aleph, which will start from the Mishnah. And just to get a running start to figure out what we're talking about over here, it says, Ma being Pesach Harishon L'Sheni. What's the difference between the first Pesach and the second Pesach? Second Pesach means Pesach Sheni, if a person missed bringing the Karban Pesach in Nisan, so you could bring the Karban Pesach in Iyar, it doesn't have all of the same rules. Harishon Asur Bali Rabbi Motzei, V'Hasheni Chametz U'Matzah Imo B'Bayis. Only on the first Pesach does a person have the Isser of having chametz in his house. If he missed the first Pesach and he's bringing a Karban Pesach on the second Pesach, he doesn't have any issue of having chametz in his house, etc. Okay, so let's move already to the Mishnah. So the Mishnah, to the Gemara. So the Gemara goes through, it's a little bit complex, but it goes through the different drashos for how we know what does apply in Pesach Sheni, what doesn't apply in Pesach Sheni. And basically, what it comes out is things that are attached to the actual Karban do apply, and things that are not attached to the Karban don't apply. That's a general rule. And there's drashos to apply that to all the different types of Isurim. And so the Gemara goes through, Mahaprat, it's at the end of that line on the top, Mahaprat, Mefurish, Mitzvah Saseh, Velo Saseh Shenitik Laseh, Velo Saseh Gamor. Just like the details which are stated in the Pasuk that apply to Pesach Sheni, it speaks about Mitzvah Sasehs, it speaks about a lo saseh shenitik laseh, and it speaks about a regular lo saseh. So af kol mitzvah v'lo saseh shenitik laseh v'lo saseh gomer b'klalei v'lo saseh gomer period. So also all mitzvahs that have to do with the Karban Pesach itself, if it's an aseh or a lo saseh shenitik laseh or a lo saseh gomer, are going to apply also Pesach Sheni. But if it doesn't apply to the Karban Pesach itself, then it's not going to apply on Pesach Sheni. And then the Gemara goes through each type of Isser, what is included in Pesach Sheni, what's not included in Pesach Sheni. So, B'cholei dematzos merorim mai kamarbi tzliish. So that which you have to eat, it says explicitly that you have to eat the Karban Pesach Sheni with matzah and maror. It also includes, that's a regular mitzvah say, it also includes that you have to eat it roasted, even though it doesn't say it explicitly. But we're learning from the fact that there's one type of mitzvah say that applies to the Karban Pesach itself that applies to Pesach Sheni. So there's another type of mitzvah say that also applies, and that's you have to roast it. And b'pratei maimamai, and what's it going to exclude? Right, the klale are the things that's including, the prati are the things that it's excluding. Hashbasa sa'ar, right, getting rid of your chametz, which is the mitzvah essay. And ifachana, maybe it should be the other way around. Maybe we should have the mitzvah of getting rid of chametz on Pesach Sheni, but we shouldn't have the mitzvah of roasting the Karban Pesach. So we say, no, mitzvah de gupe adif. We would rather include things that have to do with the Karban Pesach itself. Biklale, and here's the part where we're getting to what we need to see. Biklale delo yashir imenu ad boker mai kamarba, included in that which is said explicitly by the Karban Pesach, that you're not allowed to leave anything until the morning. What are we going to include? Lo totzi mimenu. There's an isser, you can't take it out of the place you're eating it. So machlokes that refers to the group of people that are eating it, or the physical place. But the idea is there is an isser to take the Karban Pesach out of its place. And we're going to skip the parentheses, although we might need to come back to that later. And what are we going to exclude? What doesn't apply on Pesach Sheni is lo yirav, lo yamatzeh. So we saw that the Gemara started off saying we're going to give examples of different types of mitzvos, and some things are going to be included, some things are going to be excluded. So first we spoke about a regular mitzvah saseh, right? That was the order we were given, and then we're going to talk about a lo saseh shenitik laseh. So this last group that we saw are all lo saseh shenitik laseh, right? You can't leave over the Karban Pesach till the morning, but if you do, you have to burn it, mitzvah to burn it. You're not allowed to take the Karban Pesach out. It's not so clear if there's a mitzvah to say attached to that. We're going to have to discuss that. Maybe there's a mitzvah to say you have to bring it back in. And then it seems like also, Bal Yirav Bal Yamatzeh is an example of a lo saseh hanitik baseh. That's the way the Gemara set it up. So from this reading of the Gemara, which is the girsa we have in the Gemara, so then we would say that Bal Yirav Bal Yamatzeh is a lav hanitik baseh. That's what the Gemara says. It puts it in that category. That would be like Shitas Rashi, not like the Shita of the Rambam. So Shagasari says, and the truth is you can already see in the parentheses that there's a little bit of a different girsos over here, that instead of those words, lo saseh shenitik laseh, the Rambam would replace that with lo saseh she'ino gomer. It's not a regular lo saseh. Doesn't explain why. Maybe it's because it's lav shenitik laseh, maybe for a different reason. And the truth is, you see that, and he explains the reason why it's not a lo saseh gomer is because you generally don't get malchus for these types of isurim. Either because it's nitik laseh, or because it's a lav she'im bo maisa. Right, so it could be that by Rabbi Yamatzeh, the reason why it's similar to lo yashu yimenu is not because they're both lo saseh nitik laseh, it's because they both don't have malchus. Because they both don't have a maisa attached to it. Now you see already in the Gemara, in the parentheses, it said that what's the comparison between lo yashir yimenu and lo sotzi yimenu? It says there, "Dedami lei dehai mifsal benoser v'hai mifsal biyotze," that they both have become puzzle through what happens to it. So they have some sort of similarity between them. The Gemara, according to that parentheses, which we generally take out the parentheses, but if you would have that gear, so it's not saying that they're both a lo saseh shenitik baseh. Right, so you see already there's a little bit of uncertainty in the correct version of the Gemara, but just to get that out on the table to begin with is, our version of the Gemara is clearly like Shitas Rashi, it's a lo saseh shenitik laseh, but it could be that there's other versions. Okay, now according to the Shita of the Rambam, that it is a lo saseh, it's not a lo saseh nitik laseh, it's a regular lo saseh. The question is why? Right? Why doesn't it have the regular rule of lo saseh shenitik laseh? You have a lo saseh by Rabbi Matzeh, and you have the aseh of destroying the chametz. So what makes it not a lo saseh nitik laseh? Right? What factors are missing? So we already saw the Rambam once before in Hilchos Tumur, but we'll see it again inside, because over there he gives two rules for what would take something out of being a lo saseh nitik laseh, and we're going to see if either of those two maybe apply to the Isser Chametz. So it says over there, V'lama lo kanala Tumura. Why, this is the second Ma'ar Makom, why is there Malchus on Tumura? V'harei lav sheba nitik laseh. Isn't the lav fixed up by an aseh? And as the pasuk says, if you did do Tumura, right, which again, as we spoke about before, is speaking of trying to switch an animal that was going to be used for a carbon with a different animal. So if you do that, they're both kodesh. So that's already an asay telling you what to do after the Isser was done. So the Rambam explains that it's not nitik ba'asay, even if neishish ba'asay yishnei lavim. One reason is, there's only one asay, but there's two lavim. So one asay can't take away the malchus from two lavim. V'odan, another reason is, she'in lav shabashav la'asay. The lav and the asay are not equal. She'atzibur v'ashutvin in osin tamura. The tzibur and shutvin, they don't make tamura, im hemiru, if they do the isser. In other words, they don't affect the asay when they do the isser. Afal pishin muzhar and shalemiru, even though they have the isser, nimsis omer, so it turns out that we say, sha'yachit shehi marei tamura kodesh, that if a individual does tamura, so then that which he's trying to switch becomes kodesh. Even if he does it on Shabbos, he'll get malchus arbam. But if a partner tries to do tamura, he tries to do it on the carbon of the tzibor, since there's a partnership, he'll get malchus if the ein had tamura kodesh. The tamura is not kodesh. And so since the los asay applies to everybody, but the asay does not apply to everybody, only applies to an individual, doesn't apply to partners, and it doesn't apply to the tzibur. So therefore, we don't view this as a los asay hanitik basay, because they're not the same. They don't apply to the same groups of people. Now, before we get into figuring out how it works in regards to chametz on Pesach, so the Shagat discusses a little bit about the tamura itself, is that which the Rambam says, that the tzibur, or partners, do have the isser of tamura. They just don't have the asay, where both animals become kodesh. That is not clear, and is actually against our girsa in the Gemara in Tamura Daf Beis Amud Beis. So let's just see that inside. The Gemara says over there in Mara Malkum Gimel, Ubein Rabbi Meir, Ubein Rabbi Yehuda, Taima de Rabbi Krali Isha. Whether the sheet of Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda, which is something we discussed earlier in the Gemara, which is not, we don't need to know exactly what their machlokas is, but they both use a pasuk to teach us that a woman has a chiyuv of tamura. Right? Even if she switches a carbon, she also gets malchus. So Halo Rabbi Kra, had the pasuk not included her, Havamina Avda Tamura, Havamina Ki Avda Tamura Lalakia, I would have thought she does not get malchus for Tamura. V'amar Yehuda Mar Rab, but doesn't Yehuda say in the name of Rab, V'chin Tanad Be'Rabbi Yishmael, it's also a brisa, that ish, o isha, ki yasu mikol chatos ha'adam, a man or woman that does any of the isurim, that's a partial quote from a pasuk, and we learn from there, hishva akasav isha li'ish, l'chol onshin shav. Any punishment in the Torah, a woman is the same status as a man. So therefore, why do I need a pasuk to tell us that a woman gets malchus if she does this isur of tamura? A woman is chayv in all isurim, just like a man. Why do we need it? So the Gemara answers, according to this version, Istrich, we need it. Mahudatim, I would have thought, Hani mili onesh deshave bein biacha bein b'tzibur, that she only gets punished for something that applies both to an individual and to a tzibur. But in our case, kimida onesh she'inu shava b'kolhu, it's a punishment that doesn't apply to everybody. Dichnan, as the Mishnah says, in hatzibur v'ashutvin osin tamura, the tzibur and the shutvin don't make a tamura. Ishanami kavda lulakia. So I would have also thought a woman would not get malchus for it. Kamash one. That's why I need a pasuk to teach us that the woman does get malchus. So what do we see from our gears in the Gemara? The Gemara clearly understands that when the Mishnah says that the tzibur and the shutvin don't make tamura, it means that there's no punishment for them. Not that they don't have the mitzvah of tamura. They don't even have the isser of tamura to get malchus, which is not like the way the Rambam explained it. However, we see already in Rashi that he has an alternate girsa. I mean, Rashi goes through two versions. So we have the version we had in the Gemara, and if you see the Rashi over there, he explains, Umishani hachi garsinan, and the answer is in the following girsa. Right, so the whole question is the same. Right, why do we need a pasuk to exclude a woman? Isn't a woman the same as a man for everything? The answer is Hani mili lav shish bomaisa. That's only a lav that has an action. Bahani onshin shavin zelazeh, tiksiv asher yasu, demashma onshin shish ben maisa. the punishment that men and women are the same in is learned out from a pasuk that says asher yasu, that which they do, which implies it has to be a punishment that has some sort of action that they did to the Isser. Kigon chilul Shabbos, v'shari surim, like Michal Shabbos or any other Isser sheish b'maisa that has some sort of action. Avalav she'im bo ma'isa, but if the Isser has no action, Kigon Tamura, like our case of Tamura, Dibi Dibura Talia Milsa, it's just speech. Imelo Tilki, I might think she should not get Malchus. Kamash Malan, that she gets Malchus. So this version that Rashi is saying here is completely different than the version that we had. And according to this version, we're not talking about a tzibur, and we're not talking about a shutfin. Right? It's a completely different logic, and therefore we wouldn't be able to prove from this Gemara what the halacha would be by tzibur and shutfin. So it would seem that the Rambam would have to use this girsa of Rashi in the Gemara of Tamura in order to explain his halacha. Now, there's a general question on this girsa, which is that the Gemara explicitly says later on in Tamura that Tamura is considered an action. Since it causes an animal to become kadosh, so therefore that speech is not just a regular speech, it's a speech that caused an action. Right? It caused something to happen. And therefore it is considered a lav sheyish bo maisa. Now the Rambam anyway holds it's a lav sheyish bo maisa. So the Rambam's anyway going to have to deal with that Gemara later on. When we brought this up in one of the earlier shurim, I don't know if I said it or the Shagas Aryeh said it, we understood that the Rambam over there is also going to have a different girsa. Right? Because the Gemara later on says it has a maisa. Here, according to this, the girsa of Rashi, it does not have a maisa. The Rambam also says explicitly that it does not have a maisa, which would be like this girsa of Rashi. So the girsa of the Gemara later on has to be different according to those shitas. Okay, now there's another major difficulty with the girsa of Rashi, and that is based on the Gemara in Yevamos Daf Pei Daled Amud Beis, which is the fourth Maramakum Daled, and it says as follows. And this is talking about a whole different topic, but in the end we'll see how it connects to what we said about Tamura. Lo yikhu, lo yikachu. The word lo yikhu could also be read lo yikachu, so they can't take and they can't be taken. That teaches us the woman has the same isser just like the man. Here it's talking about isuri kahuna. For example, a kohen is not allowed to marry a gerusha, so the gerusha is not allowed to marry the kohen. Right? Just like there's an isser for him, there's an isser for her. And that's what this drasha teaches us. Amar Rava. Rava says, Kol heicha duhu muzhar, he muzharas. Anytime that he has an isser, she has an isser. Kol heicha duhu lo muzhar, if he doesn't have an isser, he lo muzharas. She's not going to have an isser as well. Oh, by the way, I misspoke before. I mean, it's going to become clear as we go through, but this is not a question against the gears of Rashi and the Rambam. This is going to be a question against the gears that we have in the Gemara. Which says that the issue by the Tamura was that it was a lav shein shava b'kol. That doesn't apply to everybody. It doesn't apply to partners. That's the version that we're going to raise an issue with. Okay, v'hamei hacha nafka. Now, is it true that we learn from here? Hamar b'yehud amarav nafka. We can learn it from Yehud amarav, the same Yehud amarav that we quoted in Tamura. Damar b'yehud amarav v'chin tan b'yishmal isha isha kiyasmi kol chatos ha'adam hishva kazav isha ishchol and shabatorah. Right, the same statement we saw in the Gemara Tamura is that there's a general rule learned out from that pasuk over there of kol chatos ha'adam that a woman is chayiv in all of the isurim, just like a man. So why over here I need the special drasha of lo yichu and lo yikachu? I think Gemara answers, had I only had that pasuk, I would have thought lav hashava b'kol, that it only applies to isurim that apply to everybody. Lav she'inu shava b'kol lo, but an isur that doesn't apply to everybody, like the isurei kahuna, so then they wouldn't be chayiv. The Gemara asks, "Harei tuma the lav she'in shava b'kol." What about tuma, which meaning a kohen that's not allowed to come tamei to a mace? That doesn't apply to everybody. The time at a kosar rachmana b'nei Aaron v'lo b'nos Aaron, and the only reason we do exclude women is because of the pasuk of b'nei Aaron, which excludes b'nos Aaron. Halav hachi, if it weren't for that, havamina nashim chayavos, I would have thought women are chayiv, as they would not be able to come tamei to a mace, a woman bas kohen. My taima, so what's the reason? La mishum de Yehuda Marav, isn't it because of what Yehuda Marav said? The Gemara says, lo, digamrim lo yikachu, it's because of lo yikachu. It was, had I only had mikol chatas adam, I would have never thought that a bas kohen can't become tamis. It's only because I see that the women have the same chiyuvim if they marry a kohen that they're not supposed to marry, then I now would think that a bas kohen can't become tamis. And or I would have thought to learn the other way around, right? That I would have, from Tuma, seen that women are not chayiv in mitzvahs of kahuna, therefore I need the pasuk of lo yikachu to teach us that they are chayiv in the forbidden relationships of kohanim to gerushas, etc. So, that Gemara seems to be very similar to the Gemara we saw in Tamura, according to our girsa. But you have the Gemara over here that we need a pasuk to teach us that women are chayiv in Yisurim, even if they don't apply to everybody. And the Gemara in Tamura also said the same thing, that women are chayiv in Tamura, even though it's a non-issur. That applies to everybody, it doesn't apply to partners. Now, the Shagged said he really asks, it's really one question, but the question can be asked in 3 different ways. So we're going to ask this one question in 3 ways. If the Havamin over here in our Gemara in Yevamos is because it's a lav she'eino shaveh b'chol, why do I need a pasuk to include them? I could just learn out from Tamura, right? Once I have the pasuk by Tamura that women are chayiv in Tamura, even though it's a lav she'eino shaveh b'chol, so then I don't need a pasuk by the psuli kahuna because I already know this concept from Tamura. You can ask the question the opposite way, right? Why do I need the pasuk by Tamura? If I have the pasuk by psuli kahuna, so I don't need the pasuk by Tamura. There's a third way you could also ask, which is, if Lomais I have 2 psukim, so then it should be a, what's the lashon we use? It should be a shnei ksuvim abam ke'echad. That I have 2 limudim teaching me the same thing, and we say shnei ksuvim abam ke'echad ein malamdin. That I have 2 psukim teaching us the same thing, and I can't learn it to anywhere else. And not only can you not learn it to anywhere else, you actually learn the opposite. So as I would have the pasuk by Tamura and the pasuk by psuli kahuna to teach us that specifically in these cases, even though it's a lav she'eino shaveh b'chol, women are chayiv, but a different lav she'eino shaveh b'chol, we would know that a woman's patur. What would be an example of that? A bas kohen becoming tamis. But we see in our Gemara we need a pasuk for a bas kohen that she's allowed to become tamis. I don't learn it out from a shnei ksuvim bam ke'echad. Right, so if we put these 2 Gemaras together, we're left with a paradox. I mean, you could ask it in these 3 different ways, but the idea is we have an extra limud. Bottom line is, you have an extra limud. One of these 3 limudim is extra. So therefore, that's a problem, that's a question, an unanswered question, that we have, if we have the girsa of the Gemara in Tamura, according to the way we have it in the Gemara, which says it's referring to lav she'eino shaveh b'chol. Okay, so that's dealing with those girsos. Now, getting back to chametz on Pesach. Could it be that the reason why the Rambam says chametz on Pesach is not a lav hanitik laseh? Could that be because the lav applies to different set of people than the aseh? Could it be that women are chayiv in the lav of Bal Yira Bal Yamatzeh because it's a los aseh, and women are chayiv in all los asehs, even if they're time bound? But the mitzvah of tashbisu, to get rid of the chametz, women would be patur because it's a mitzvah seisha zman grama. If that would be the case, so then we would understand why it's not a lav hanitik baseh, because the Rambam already said his rule is if the aseh and the los aseh apply to 2 different sets of people, so then they're not attached. So could we possibly say that? So the Shabbos first wants to say that doesn't seem to be correct, because we would assume that Bal Yira and Bal Yamatzeh are attached to that aseh of tashbisu, right? Just similarly, like we say, the isser of eating chametz and the mitzvah of eating matzah are connected, right? So even though matzah is a mitzvah seisha zman grama, women are chayiv to eat matzah. So maybe we would say the same thing by tashbisu, the aseh, and the los aseh of Bal Yira Bal Yamatzeh. So he first explains it doesn't seem to be so, because the 2 are really not as related as you would think. Because number 1, there's a mitzvah aseh of getting rid of your chametz, even at a time when there's no isser of Bal Yira Bal Yamatzeh. As we've spoken about in the previous shiurim, the mitzvah begins at Chatzos Erev Pesach. The isser doesn't begin until Pesach starts. So therefore, we see that the aseh is not really dependent on the los aseh. It seems to be a separate aseh. You could, even if we didn't have the los asay, I could fulfill the asay. And the same thing really works the other way around. There are other ways of getting out of the los asay besides by fulfilling the asay. If you would give away all your chametz before Pesach and you took it out of your reshus, so then you wouldn't be over the isser of bayira bayimatzeh, even though you never did tashbisu. So therefore, it seems that these two things are not connected enough that we would say that if a woman is chayiv in the los asay of bayira bayimatzeh, then for sure she's chayiv in the asay. Not necessarily. Right? The two things are not so related. So the Shagas Aryeh, for some reason at this point, I can't really understand it in the Sefer, he like gets set on it, that it has to be women are chayiv in tashbisu. Even though he had just explained that it's not mukhrach, you don't have to say that, but for some reason locks into this idea that it has to be that women are chayiv. And he says, so it must be, it's a gezeir shava from the word sa'ar. And this we actually saw in an earlier Shagas Aryeh, that he uses the gezeir shava of sa'ar from bayira bayimatzeh to tashbisu. And I forget we learned exactly from that limud in one of the previous shira, but over here he's saying we're going to use that limud also to tell us that whoever is chayiv bayira bayimatzeh is also going to be chayiv in tashbisu. And therefore women who are chayiv in the isser are also going to be chayiv in the asay, because of this gezeir shava. Now, we don't find in Chazal that they made this gezeir shava, right, to learn out this din. So there's what to be argued on. And in fact, so I saw that it was brought in the name of the Pri Megadim that he holds that women are potter from the mitzvah of tashbisu because necessity is man grama. The truth is, though, almost all of the poskim do say like the Shagas Aryeh, women are chayiv. A woman does have to get rid of her chametz erev Pesach because of the mitzvah of tashbisu. But it's not so clear, right? The Shagas Aryeh took it as for granted and then like worked backwards to figure out why, but you don't have to agree with his logic, and there are those that disagree. Okay. So what we came out so far is that would not be a reason to say that bayira bayimatzeh is not a lav hanitik basei. We want to say maybe it's because it applies to two separate groups of people, because women are only chayiv one, not the other, but the Shagas Aryeh doesn't hold that. Shagas Aryeh holds that the mitzvah and the isser apply evenly to everybody. In which case, maybe it should be a lav hanitik basei. So now let's look at the other rule of the Rambam. The other rule of the Rambam was, if I have two lavin and only one asay, so then it's not a lav hanitik basei. Here also, I have two lavin really, because I have bal yirah and bal yimatzeh are really two separate psukim and two separate lavin, and therefore would not be able to be fixed up by the mitzvahs asay of tashbisu. Now first, let's see, inside the Gemara itself actually says this rule, and it's a Gemara in Tumur Daf Daled on Beis, Mar Makom Hey, and he says over there, Yosar Redim V'Ka Amar La Hashmaitza, Redim was saying over a sugya, Amar Le Abai said to him, V'Kol Lav Shenitik L'Asei Lo Laki, is it really true? Every Lav Shenitik L'Asei, there's no Malchus? V'Hamimar, what about Temura? De Lav Shenitik L'Aseihu, it's a Lav HaNitik L'Asei, the Laki, and there is Malchus, that as the Mishnah says, Lo Shadam Rashai L'Hamir Shem Himer Mumar, as the Mishnah says, a person is not allowed to do it, but if he does it, he gets Malchus. So Havi Lahu, so the Gemara answers, the reason why it's not Nitik Basei, and the reason why you can get Malchus is Havi Le Trei Lavi V'Chad Asei, two Lavin, only one Asei, V'Asi Chad Asei, V'Akar Trei Lavi. One Asei can't uproot two Lavin. So it does this very clearly, the Gemara itself very clearly states this rule of the Rambam, which theoretically should apply to our case of chametz. However, if you look in Tosfos, in Kulam Pei Aleph of Abizari Maskal Hanoch, which is Mar Makom Vav, he qualifies this rule in a way which will have tremendous effect on our din of bayira bayimatzeh. So he says like this, Dahainu dafka, I'm sorry, in the middle of a sentence really, but I mean, whatever came before is not so necessary for our discussion, that Hainu dafka heicha deshnei lavin smuchin zelazeh. It's only in a situation where the two lavin are right next to one another. Teda, and you should know this is true. Damar perak lokin, it says in Mesechus Makkos, the lo sasei shekanu asei lokan alav. If the los asay comes before the asay, then you still could get malchus. It's only if the los asay, if the asay is after that, the los asay, do you not get malchus. Umaisi, and what's the case that it brings over there? Sending the people that are tamei out of the camp. And there's then an isser that they shouldn't make the machane tamei. But first there's the mitzvah, get out of the machane. Then there's the isser, don't make the machane tamei. So that's not a isser which is fixed up by an essay. The Tana, and then it says, Elohin alokin, a case where there is malchus is tamei abal mikdash. Right? So that would be a situation where the first assay came, and then there's a los assay. In that situation, there is malchus. Umarayihi, what's the raya of the Gemara? Dilma hasam yishum deika trei lavi. Maybe the reason over there is because there's two lavin. Lo yatamu. Also there's the lo yatamu, they can't become tamei. Vikanami lav devel hamikdash lo tavo, that you can't come to the base of mikdash when you're tamei. And so there's two lavin over there. And we said in the Gemara and Tamura that if you have two lavin, so then the assay won't absolve you of malchus, even if the assay would come afterwards. So how can we prove from this case, the case of sending the tameim out of the machane, that if the assay comes after the los assay, then you do get malchus? Maybe you also wouldn't get malchus in that case, it's just there's two lavin here. And anytime you have two lavin, the assay can't take care of it. But furthermore, we also say that there's no malchus for the isser of theft, because it's fixed up by the save. They have to return the object that was stolen. You also have the lav de lo sashok, the amar rava, the perik hamakabel, hainu eshek, hainu gazel, that they're the same thing. Why is it written twice in two different ways? Lav or lav b'shnei lav, it would be over on two isurim. Now we said if there's two isurim, you still get malchus, even if there's an assay. So Gezel, there's two lavin, so you should be able to get malchus. The Gemara says you don't get malchus. Elavadi, it has to be daf geichishein lavim smuchin kamer deloach or lahu chadasei. Only if the two lavin are written next to one another do you not get malchus. But here by lo tigzel, since it's written in two different places, so then the assay could take care of it. That's what we need to see from the Tosfos. Now, maybe before we get sidetracked, so we'll say it now and then we'll get sidetracked and we'll come back to it, is that the Pesach, the Isser of Bayra Bayimatzeh, is also considered in two separate places. They're not written next to one another. They're both in the same parsha. They're in Parshas Bo, but one is in Parak Yud Beis, Bayimatzeh is in Parak Yud Beis, and Bayra is in Parak Yud Gimel. And they're two different prakim. They're not next to one another, and therefore we wouldn't say in this situation that the reason why you can't get malchus is because there's two lavin. Right? It would be like the Isser of Gezel, where even though there's two lavin, you still don't get malchus because of the assay. And therefore we'd be going back to square one of trying to figure out why the Rambam holds that it's not a lav hanitik assay. Right? We lost the first reason, right, that applies to two separate groups of people. We said it's not true. And we now lost our second reason because there's two lavin, because two lavin doesn't apply in these types of cases where the two lavin are in two different places. Okay, now the sidetrack, which is very interesting, although it's a complete sidetrack, but I try to go into everything that the Shaggad speaks about, at least when he goes into it, is that case of Gezel that Tosfos spoke about is extremely difficult to understand. And the reason is because if you look in the Gemara, in Bava Metzia Daf Samach Aleph Amud Aleph, the Gemara says as follows: Amar Rava. Rava says it's Uzayin the Maramakomos. Amar Rava says Lamali de Kasrachmana Lav Beribis Lav Gezel Vlav Ona. Why does the pasuk need to write an Isser by all three of the Isurim of Ribis, Gezel, and Ona? Ona means when you cheat someone, you charge them an improper price. So all those three seem to be the same idea, and maybe I could learn one from another. So the Gemara goes through why you can't learn one from each one, and then I want to skip down to where it says Lilith Rahman Lav Begazel, which is where exactly is that? Yeah, it's the third to last narrow line. at the end of the line. Lo l'terachman alav begezel. It should not write alav by gezel. The tesi mehanach. I can learn from the other two. Demai parachta. What question can we have against it? Mala ribis shechein chiddush. Ribis is a chiddush. The chiddush is because everybody wants to pay interest. You don't want to pay interest, but you're very happy to pay interest if you can make money off of the loan that you're getting, and so you'll happily share your profits with the person that lent you the money. So therefore, it's not the same as any other type of gezel, and I can't learn anything from that case. Ona tochiach. Ona disproves it, because ona is not a chiddush. Right? No one wants to be overcharged. Malo ona shechein lo yadu machal ribis tochiach. Ona is different because he doesn't know that he's being mochel. So ribis disproves it, because ribis he does know, and he's mochel, and still it's aser. So those two things are not similar in these ways. Chazar din lori zek kraizev, lori zek kraizev. So therefore, you can go back and forth. Neither one is similar to the other. Hasad hashavah shebehen, the common denominator between them is shechein gozlo, that he took money from his friend that doesn't really belong to him. Afani abi gezel, so therefore I could also learn that gezel is aser. Amri, so they answer this. It's not really an answer. They're saying hachanami. It's true that I don't need a pasuk for gezel. I can learn it out from a tzad shaveh between ribis and ona. Lav begezel lamli. So why does it write a lav by gezel? Lekuvish schar sachir. It's to teach us that if a person doesn't pay his worker, then he's over an isser. Kovish schar sachir behed yiksiv bey lo sasok sachir ani vavion. It says explicitly in the pasuk you're not allowed to withhold wages. So our answer is lav or love b'shnei lavin. We're going to be over 2 isurim of withholding wages. So what it comes out is that there really is no pasuk that teaches us I'm not allowed to steal from somebody. That's self-understood from all the other isurim. And the pasuk that says you're not allowed to steal is really referring to something else. Tosfos explains, "V'lav or love b'shnei lavin," right below that. If you're going to say, "V'look me begezel gufei v'lav or love b'shnei lavin." If we're anyway using it for an extra lav, so why don't I say it says lo sigzol, so I'll say it's talking about gezel, and you'll be over 2 lavim of gezel. Why make it 2 lavim of withholding wages? What's the difference? So Yishlomer, so the answer is Mishum de lo lucky alav de gezel. You're not going to be loka. You're not going to get malchus for lav of gezel. Mishum de nitik lasei, because it's fixed up by an asay. Avokimu kaminu nakubish schar sachir b'ino inyan. But if I apply it to withholding wages with an ino inyan, means if I'm not going to use it for gezel, then lucky shaper. So then the extra lav means it gets an extra set of malchus. There would never be an extra set of malchus by gezel, because gezel is nitek v'aseh. Right, there's the mitzvah of giving it back. Okay, now this Tosfos really explains the first Tosfos that we saw. Okay, the first Tosfos is difficult now because we said gezela has 2 lavin, and those 2 lavin are fixed up by an aseh, and nevertheless there's still not malchus, but even though there's 2 lavin, because there's 2 lavin in different places. That's what Tosfos said originally. Now we come to this Gemara and we see that the pasuk says it's not really talking about gezel at all. This Tosfos that we just saw really explains it, because Tosfos says the whole reason, when he's coming to explain the Gemara, the whole reason why we would not apply it to an extra lav by gezel is because applying an extra lav to gezel anyway wouldn't give you malchus. Why not? Right, if I have 2 lavin by gezel, so then maybe it could get malchus, because 1 asay of returning the gezela won't knock out 2 los asays of gezel. So from there, Tosfos could bring his raya that if I have 2 lavin from 2 different places, I'm still not going to get malchus, even if there's only 1 asay. And therefore, Tosfos, the way he explained the Gemara, it's a little bit putting a lot of different pieces together. If it would make another lav by gezel, it wouldn't help to give you malchus, because the 2 lavim are in 2 different places. Therefore, the Gemara doesn't apply the pasuk lo sigzol to gezel, because it wouldn't do anything. That's why the Gemara applies it to withholding wages. That's the way the Shaggai explains those 2 Tosfos together. Right? One Tosfos without the other one makes no sense. When you have these two Tosfos together, now I can understand each one. So this is just a very interesting side point. And right, getting back to what we were talking about, though, is that it turns out that Bayra Matzeh, since they're in two different places, is not going to be strong enough to tell us that you get Malchus if there's an assay to fix it up. So why does the Rambam in fact say that there is Malchus? We're stuck with this question on the Rambam. Now, the Shagatari throws in an interesting raya against the Ri. We already kind of discarded the Ri. But within the Ri, without getting into his shita of what Lavanitek Vasei means, just within his shita that it is a Lavanitek Vasei, like Rashi, so he just brought an interesting, this is just a little question over here. We can see it in Os Tes in the Os Tes in the Maramakomos, that the Gorim Psachim Daf Dalid Amud Beis says, Amar Abaye, where is it? Minon, how do we know? Notice, how do we know that the Asay of Tashbisu is Erev Pesach? Right, even though the Bayra Matzeh doesn't start until Pesach itself. So Abaye says, Trei Kar Ksiv, because we have two Psukim. Ksiv, one pasuk says, Shos Yom Sorli Matzu V'Teichem. That for 7 days you can't have the chametz. Ksiv, and then different pasuk writes, Af Yom Rishon Tashbisu Sorli V'Teichem. They have the mitzvah of Tashbisu. HaKetzad, so what is the mitzvah coming to teach us? L'Rabus Arba Asar Levira. To include that the 14th day, in other words, Erev Pesach is already included in the mitzvah of getting rid of your chametz. That's what Abaye says. Now it's not clear from Abaye what the drush is. I have the Isser of Bayra Matzeh, and I have the mitzvah of Tashbisu. How does that teach me that the mitzvah of Tashbisu is Erev Pesach? It's not clear. So one explanation, Tosfos brings there, Derei Masel Ksiv, V'nir L'ri, Demi Yisur De Kakadarish. It's an extra pasuk. I don't need the assay if I already know that I can't have the chametz. Unless the assay starts before the Isser. That's the way the Ri understands. And Tosfos gives other explanations also. There are other explanations. But it says the Shagatari, how could the Ri himself say that Tashbiz is an extra pasuk? I need the assay in order to make it a lav hanitik b'assay so that I don't get malchus for the Isser. That's not extra. I said, how come over here the Ri himself is trying to explain that the drush of Abaye is from the fact that the pasuk of Tashbiz is extra. It's certainly not extra according to the Ri. That's just a separate question, right? Not connected to what we were talking about until now. Okay. So, the Shagas Aryeh wants to ask now another question on the Shitas that hold that Bayra Matzeh is fixed up by an assay. This is possibly a little complicated, but it discusses a lot of things that we discussed in the past. Hopefully we could understand it. Is we spoke about previously of the Machlokes Reish Lakish and Rav Yochanan of bitlo v'lo bitlo, kimo v'lo kimo, which difficult concept, but basically we're now going to discuss the Shita of Rav Yochanan. Rav Yochanan holds whenever I have a lav hanitik basei, so I can never get malchus for the lav unless I do some sort of action which prevents me from forever again doing the assay. Right? For example, in the case of Shilach HaKain, took the mother bird, and then I shechted the mother bird. So now I can no longer send the mother bird away. If I shech the mother bird, then I could get malchus for taking it. But as long as I don't shecht it, since I have the opportunity to do the assay, even if I haven't done the assay yet, I cannot get the malchus for the sister. That's the Shita of Yochanan. So, if we would say that Bayra Matzeh is a lav hanitik basei, so that would mean, according to Rav Yochanan, you cannot get malchus until you make it impossible to destroy your chametz. Now, how can you make it impossible to destroy your chametz? So, according to the Shitas Chachamim, there's not a case. It never works out. Because the only way I would be able to make it so that it's impossible for me to destroy my chametz is if I would somehow get rid of the chametz, but then I destroyed it. Right? So it's a catch-22. If I destroy the chametz, then I was mekayem the mitzvah. If I didn't destroy the chametz, I still have the possibility of doing the mitzvah. Because I could destroy it. So according to the Chachamim, there would be no way to get malchus for it. According to the Shita of Rabbi Yehuda, that I can only destroy chametz by burning it, so then I could have a case where I can do an action that will prevent me from ever doing the mitzvah. Because I only get the mitzvah if I burn it. But if I flush it down the toilet, I'm not going to be able to burn it anymore, but I wasn't Yotzei the mitzvah. So according to Rabbi Yehuda, there would be a possibility of getting malchus for Bal Yirah Bal Yamatzeh if he destroys the chametz, not by burning it. Now, how does Rabbi Yehuda learn that you have to burn the chametz? It's a kal v'chomer from nosar. Nosar, the carbon that you left over, you have to burn. So also chametz, which you left over past the proper time, you also have to burn. I don't remember exactly what the kal v'chomer was offhand, but it's a kal v'chomer. Now we know, this is something we also spoke about in a previous year, that ein mazhir min adin. We can't use a kal v'chomer to teach me that I get malchus for an isser. It turns out that according to this logic, that Rabbi Yehuda would be using a kal v'chomer to give malchus for this isser. Because according to the chacham that don't have the kal v'chomer, there's no way to get malchus, as we explained. Because if you destroy it, so you did the mitzvah. If you didn't destroy it, you still could do the mitzvah. And now Rabbi Yehuda is doing a kal v'chomer, which now gives me a possibility of getting malchus. Because since the kal v'chomer teaches me I have to specifically burn the chametz, if I would destroy the chametz in a different way, I get malchus. So using a kal v'chomer to give malchus, that you can't do. So therefore, this is a difficulty according to the Shitas that hold that Bal Yirah Bal Yamatzeh is a lav hanitik b'aseh, that you wouldn't get malchus except for this kal v'chomer. So the Shaggad entertains a possible answer, which is, you can't compare this to the rule of ein mazhir min adin. Ein mazhir min adin means that there's no isser in the Torah, and I'm learning a new isser from a kal v'chomer. So I can't give malchus for a new isser, which is learned from a kal v'chomer. But if I already have an isser, there's just some sort of technicality that I can't get malchus, right? In our case, there's Bal Yirah Bal Yamatzeh, is a pasuk in the Torah. It's not learned out from a kal v'chomer. There's an isser to have the chametz. It's just there's a technicality you can't get malchus because it's a lav hanitik b'aseh. This kal v'chomer creates a possibility, right, on the side. It ends up creating a possibility for malchus. That's not a problem of ein mazhir min adin. That's just what comes out of the kal v'chomer. I had an isser already, and the kal v'chomer just gives me a possibility of getting malchus for it. It didn't teach me the isser. So therefore that would not be a problem of ein mazhir min adin. The Shaggad writes, he has proofs to both sides. He doesn't bring any of the proofs, so we don't have to get into it, but there's proofs that that's true what we just said, that if it's just a side point technicality that you could get malchus because of the kal v'chomer, it's okay. And there's proofs that it's not okay, and he leaves it at that. So it's a possible answer, and he leaves it as not so conclusive. So that would be a question against the Shita, right? A possible question against the Shita that is a lav hanitik b'aseh. Now he gets to really his main proof that he wants to say. I mean, it's not even a proof, it's like a clear logic. Bal Yirah Bal Yamatzeh is not a lav hanitik b'aseh. Not because of any technicalities, not because of the two lavim or not being even. It just doesn't follow the pattern of a regular lav hanitik b'aseh. Why? Lav hanitik b'aseh, as we saw, Tosfos quoted the Gemara in Makos, which we could see again inside, and we should, Os Yud in the Mar Makomos. It says over there, Amar Rabbi Bar Chana, Amar Yochanan, Kol Lo Aseh Shekodmu Aseh Lo Kanolav. If the aseh comes first, so then there's malchus. Amar Lo, and they said to him, Amarta, do you say that? Amar Lo Lo, he said, I didn't say it. Amar Rabbi says, Velokim Amra, but you did say it. Uksiva, and it's actually a pasuk, V'tanina, and it's clear in the Mishnah. Ksiva, as the pasuk says, Yishulchum min ha-machne, you have to send out all the people that are tamei. V'lo yitamus machaneim, you can't make the machne tamei. Tanina, and the Mishnah says, Habal mikdash tamei, that if something that comes Mesa mikdash is tamei is one of the cases in the Mishnah over there that does get malchus, right? That we saw quoted in Tosfos already, but now we saw it inside also in Makos, that if the aseh is first, and then there's the los aseh, so then there's no malchus. So therefore, if I have a case of gezel means that there's no mitzvah of returning the gezel until after you do the isser. The mitzvah only applies afterwards. Right, so that's a lav hanitik b'aseh, or burning nosar. Before I leave the carbon over, there's no mitzvah of burning the carbon. It's only after the isser is done, then there's a new mitzvah. That's a lav hanitik b'aseh. But if the aseh exists without the isser, So then it's not allowed b'nifka b'aseh. And what do we have by chametz? Chametz is not like the case of theft. Chametz is like the case of sending the tummy person out of the machane. You have to get rid of your chametz before there's an isser. You have to get rid of your chametz already in Erev Pesach. So you have to get rid of your chametz regardless of the isser. And after you do the isser, you can still do the mitzvah, right? Because that mitzvah continues throughout Pesach, but that's not going to be a mitzvah that's going to fix up your isser. That's going to be a standalone mitzvah. The isser stands alone, the mitzvah stands alone, and there could be malchus on the isser, by matzeh, like the sheet of the Rambam. Right? So this logic, which seems to be pretty compelling, right? He sides in the end, his maskana is with the sheet of the Rambam, that the isser, by matzeh, person get malchus on, regardless of whether he destroys the chametz afterwards or not. Okay? That's that of the 7.